Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sifu Mimi Chan podcast. Yay! I'm hoping that you're not tired of me for the last few episodes being me and me and me. So this time I brought on my favorite co-host, Oscar.
I was going to say you brought on me.
Lots of meat going on. Anyway, we do have a bunch of other guests lined up that will be coming in the next few episodes.
More exciting guests, better stories. But for now, let's do this filler. Let's do this filler episode.
You know, it's kind of like in those anime shows where you have the fillers. Not at all. Not at all.
Yes, it is, because those are the ones that people skip by and get to the good stuff. Naruto, why are you doing this, meeting some new person? We want to see the fights. Right?
Well, we can fight.
Okay.
That might be really fascinating for people. Not a good idea. All right. Well, earlier today, I was with my dad in this same room trying to record some podcast snippets for some of my Kung Fu weaponry, which some of the students have been coming up and asking about. So I'm hoping to try to piece together something, but he was actually pretty compliant, which is nice, because sometimes he actually just runs in the other direction when it's time to film. So,
Yeah, I think if you get more than 5 minutes, that's a success. And you did. So good job.
All right. Well, today, one of the things that you and I have been talking about over the last year that we said we were going to do last year and then we never really got around to was we are in a book club.
That's right.
We are in a book club together, but also with some of our other friends. And we try to keep up with reading. It actually started with Musashi.
That's right. Did we ever talk about that? Maybe.
I think we
must have.
And then I also talked to our dear friend Coach Dan John, about that as well.
Right.
And the value of book
Sword
club.
in the Stone, is that one?
Yes. But the value of having book clubs and why you have them. And it's not just so you read and then just talk about the book after it's done. And with Musashi, we actually did it, quote unquote, the right way, which, his concept is what we're doing with the Sword in the Stone, which is a deep dive and just kind of chapter by chapter, having a discussion after, because if you do kind of the roundup, it's just more of hey, what'd you think of that show? Or what'd you think of that book? Whereas when we're doing it chapter by chapter, there's so much value in the conversations that's being had. Yeah.
Well, if we take those two books, like the Musashi book and the Sword of the Stones, they're done two ways. One, you had an expert on that book and an expert on the history of the book and all of the analogies and meanings behind it. Taken it chapter by chapter, which is very valuable. Not everyone is as lucky to have that, so that's nice. But and then with Musashi, it was friends, and it was very casual. So at the end of each chapter, we're just oh, you know what? I really like this part, and then I really like this part, and then we would get into maybe some deeper insights, but it wasn't required. It was just casual, and it was just talking about the book. And sometimes we would get some nice insights, oh, this was really cool. And made us, and it tangent into different conversations. Which
and I think people go, oh, tangenting is kind of known to be not a positive thing, but I actually think it is really positive, because those tangents has led to some really interesting conversations. But also I think that we undervalue the tangent, that's where creativity, kind of talking about what we think about kids with boredom and how those are tangents. If you think about it, how they can just spring off of different things. And it's probably good for our mind. I have zero idea about any of the science behind any of this. And I could just be completely speculating.
Well, just because we don't know anything, science doesn't mean it's not valuable. Mm-hmm. Or it's not insightful. So,
yeah.
In martial arts, a lot of the action happens in tangents, or one of your Kung Fu brothers, Sifu George, says in the transitions.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the kind of cool things happen there. And I think in life, it's the same thing, right? There's goals that we have, and it's not a linear path, and the exciting things happen in the transitions, in the tangents, and in the not straight path. Probably.
Yeah, I think also the negative context comes in when you're supposed to be focusing on one thing and you tangent and never get around to completing that task, or kind of if you're studying something, for instance, right? And so that's when like tangents become problematic. But I really think it's been a great springboard, especially for something like reading, especially for something like a book club, where it's not also you don't need to be experts. Like none of us are experts in any of the books we're reading by any means. But I think what's cool is like we all bring our expert opinion from our walks of life, because like we have different, professions. Right. We all have different experiences growing up. We like to talk about how you, in particular, have always had a very different point of view from your childhood, but based on my childhood. And so I think that's where we don't put enough emphasis, perhaps, on tangential conversations that then can just spark, I guess, depth and meaning. Like I've really valued a lot of that. And so you've talked a lot about like my top 3 books of the year, or books that you've really enjoyed. And I pulled some stuff off the actual bookshelf, but really you and I are like huge audio listeners.
Yeah, I would like to say that I read books now, but it's really listening. And it's just the best way to consume information well, not the best way to consume information. It's the best way to consume the most information, because it allows us to do something physical. So I'll go out and, in the yard and be cleaning or washing dishes, or, doing something that doesn't require me to have a lot of thought, and I can be listening to something audio-wise. And the biggest challenge is when you're listening to something that's very enriching and you want to make a note of that, but maybe like, I don't know, I'm like scrubbing the toilet and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. Well, I guess it's going to have to wait. Try to remember what they're thinking, things like that. So
yeah. And, just for the record, I think everybody here knows that we are married and we have an arrangement. So Oscar does all that type of cleaning.
Right.
And so my audio comes in when I'm doing food prep and when I'm cooking and when I'm kind of getting things together. So if dinner is a bit off, it's because I was like really into a book, right. Maybe.
That's okay. It's rare. I can't think of a time when dinner has been off. So it's working.
It's working. Well, we have an arrangement. That's or is it an agreement? What's Both. That Seinfeld line?
Yeah, when they ran over the pigeons. Yeah. I don't know if it's agreement or arrangement.
I always get it confused. Maybe listeners, you can weigh in on that, what it is. But I think that works. But speaking of books, so in our book club, I know there's like one that always comes to mind when we talk about what we want to recommend. One of the ones, especially through COVID, those last few years, that's been like really impactful on us. And that one we do have a physical copy of. But of course,
so good.
We were so good. Like that's where we talk about the bookshelf being this like almost like a trophy place of honor. Like if we're going to actually buy the printed book, that must mean it's a big deal. And so I'll pull that one first because
I know which one that is.
And you do.
A Gentleman in Moscow. So what's funny is if you're used to getting books from the library, which is mainly what we do, and also used to doing them with audio, you'll see the cover. So I remember seeing this cover, but then seeing like the acclaim, and then it kept pushing it off. And I think you and I were on vacation, and I just started listening to this book, and I couldn't stop. Like you were doing something, and I was like, I have to finish this book. And I kept saying this book is so good. And then as soon as it was done, I couldn't stop talking about how good it was. And then when you said you were going to read it, I immediately read it again. Or listen to it again.
Yeah. And what's really great about this is like we had such an affinity and just like a connectivity with this book. I don't know if it's because it was like the time that we read it as well, or what's happening in your life. Because you and I have also talked a lot about the fact that there are some really amazing pieces of literature and all of this. But if you're not in the mood, it's just not going to capture you. But this one, it did take me a little bit of a jump start. But once I was in the mindset of, okay, I'm going to listen to this and wholeheartedly, like, absolutely loved it. And I just want to kind of show off here that we did actually get it signed by the author. What was really cool is there's a really great bookshop in New York that Martels goes to and does signings for. And I jumped at the opportunity when I saw that. And so this is inscribed to us.
Yeah, if I could think or pin down why that book was impactful at the time, is the concept is this man who's in a hotel in Moscow for over 30 years while the entire world is going on. And so in this hotel, you get all the lessons of life. And so while we were during the COVID time, and there were times where we were quarantined or whatnot, not that we spent a lot of time quarantining, but away from certain people, it was like we were still experiencing everything with life. Everything else was still going on. And it was just, yeah, it was a very cool story.
I know. And I feel like, oh, we should have been quote unquote better prepared for this podcast, because it's not like we're going to give you spoilers or digest it. But I think just kind of the reason I wanted to talk to you about this, it's been one talk that we've been putting off because I think we're like, oh, we don't have notes on the book, but I don't know it's necessarily.
I might have notes on the book, but let me check. While you're talking, let me just see if I have notes on the book.
Yeah, because I will say that Oscar is a very good student and actually takes notes on the books, whereas I never take notes on the book. And often, in all honesty, this was always a problem for me growing up in school, where I would read something, and even though I got it, I wasn't able to articulate the synopsis or explain it well. Like, I'm not great at like selling the book and going, oh my gosh, you need to read this because, and like to give you those capturing lines. My comprehension is there, but then my ability to really explain it and also answer those questions at the end of the reading passages, those were always my weakness. And I think you're the exact opposite.
Yeah,
that was always your...
I was good at reading and comprehension because I would scan and just read the answers. And then if I had time, I would read it anyway because I just liked reading. But you know, my note on A Gentleman in Moscow is, this was my favorite book of 2020 and 2021 since I read it again. It's about a book about everything in life that takes place inside of a hotel over the course of 30 years. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So
that pretty much, yeah, that's...
Good summary.
That's a summary. Read the book if you're...
But I think it's just also like any good book or any good TV show or any good movie, like for me anyway, one is I love good writing, good dialogue and all of that, but the characters, like you're caring about the characters is what's kind of important. And in this book in particular, like you just are like in love with them.
You know what? To your point, you have a lot of times read books where you get annoyed at characters.
Yes, and I'll quit a book over it. Like if there's a whiny lead character and they're the hero or heroine, I'm done.
And the thing with A Gentleman in Moscow is that there are multiple heroes and heroines and multiple people that you fall in love with. So there's not one person that you're rooting for. You're rooting for a lot of people. So for someone like you who doesn't like whiny characters or doesn't like a book if there are characters that you really don't like, this book had so many likable characters.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's just like you keep falling in love throughout the book. And it's so rare because usually you get, okay, this is the main person and their squad or whatever. And this was very different in the fact that I think even though all the characters kind of intertwined, they were all so individualistic in their own story. Right. So it's almost like we could have gotten a whole short story or longer, kind of narrative on each of these characters because they were all so fascinating, even though there wasn't as like the chef, for example, or, My
thought on things like that is I don't want to go deeper into those because that's what I think makes the book good. If it's leaving you with bits of information. To your imagination. Whereas, we have friends who are like, no, I want to know everything about this character and I don't think there's a right or wrong there. It's just what your preference is.
Yeah. Not that I want to read more about it because I think once I'm done, I'm done. But I just think that the fact that they're that rich that they could have their own narrative. They could have a spin-off episode.
Correct.
They're that good that they all could have a spin-off.
Correct.
And be successful.
But then we wouldn't necessarily read those.
No, not necessarily.
Right. It's almost like you want that done, but then what makes some things, it's like that term of absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's kind of similar. It's like it's just enough to make you...
Well, when we talk about Kung Fu all the time, we talk about performing. Like, really good Kung Fu, you still don't really want to see hours of really good Kung Fu. It's like, except for like maybe, Sifu Leroy, like he would watch hours.
There are some people.
But honestly, like you always leave them wanting more. Like that's the show business thing. Like just enough to where it's like, oh my gosh, that was fantastic. I wish this was 10 minutes longer. You always leave them wanting more. And I think in performance, in lion dancing, we just finished Lunar New Year and everybody always says, I want a 45-minute lion dance.
I'm like, no, you don't.
No, you don't. Because one, hearing drumming for 45 minutes is extraordinarily painful and the cymbals and everything, but everybody thinks, more is best when it's like less is more, like less is greater. And so it's like when it's just the right amount. And the same goes for like lengthy books.
Yeah, I mean, this book, I don't know how long was it, but it didn't seem that long. It seemed like it was just the right amount.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I mean, this book here that we have in actual pages is 462, and that's longer for me.
Well, if you think of something like Musashi was an extremely long book.
That was like a saga.
But it was a saga. It kind of similar to, you know, these Japanese animes that are like just and again and again. But it's what makes that one pay off is there's only one page of this final battle that this entire book is building up to.
Yeah.
And it's so worth it.
And there's obviously like amazing podcasts about this, which is actually why we started to read the book.
Right. I think I was listening to, it might have been the Jocko podcast where he started and said, I don't know, around episode 20, we're going to make Musashi episode 100. Start reading now. Like he gave like a year to read it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't read it, but I heard that episode. And while listening to the episode, I was like, we got to read this book.
Yes.
And then you were the one who suggested that as our first.
Yeah, and it was a really great,
it was a good choice.
But, you know, so if those of you want to give it a try, let us know what you think about A Gentleman in Moscow. Like,
it may not be for everybody.
It may not be for everybody, but we really, really loved it. And it was like, we don't always have like a consensus of everybody giving the 2 thumbs up on books, you know, like you and I sometimes align, you and I sometimes don't, and then our friends as well. So, but this one is just 5 stars all around. Like everybody loved it.
And anyone that I've recommended to and has read it has enjoyed it. There hasn't been anyone who's read it and go, now, you know what? I didn't like it. Everyone thought it was sad. All
right, so I brought this up and it's totally cheating because really Oscar found the book and brought us on that journey. But which one do you want to talk about next?
Fast forward to just the end of last year, which was recommended by your student. My Kung Fu brother, Hip Dang, is Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. And the reason I'm recommending this one is because it was almost like forced on me, right? So,
which we're huge Trevor Noah fans. Right. It's not like it was forced on you.
Not forced on me because I'm not a Trevor Noah fan. I went to we saw him live, right?
And we've seen his comedy and watched his show.
But his audiobook is only on Audible.
Right.
And I don't have an Audible.
We are big library borrowers.
Right. We pay our taxes, and that's what it goes towards the library.
It goes towards our library. We believe that this is our payback. We pay our taxes, and the library is our big takeaway.
And you know what? The library is amazing.
Phenomenal.
It's freaking amazing.
Yeah,
so
digital.
Please support your local library.
Please support the local library so it doesn't go away because it's fantastic.
Yeah. So he had said, hey, have you read this book? And I hadn't read it. And then I said, but you know what? I'll check it out. If it's on the library, I'll definitely read it. And he's only on Audible. So he said, here's credit. I'm going to give you credit to that's how passionate he was. Yeah. And I'm actually really glad he did because for the entire last year, as far as audiobooks go, I don't think there's one that I enjoyed more because Trevor Noah read it. His history is so much richer than you would think. Just like probably any person in the world, right? Like when you really dig deep into what they've been through, he of course does it with great comedic timing. But it's extremely entertaining, but really a deep dive into South Africa and into politics.
I was going to say that's another thing is we get to kind of see another culture and experience that. And you and I were recently on a cruise ship, as we often are, and that particular cruise ship had a lot of crew members from South Africa, and they love Trevor Noah. But it just like understanding more about any culture, I think is so enriching, but through the lens of someone you feel like you have a connectivity to, because it's like, oh, we see him on TV all the time. We've gone to his comedy specials. We've seen him live. And then what was great about the book to me was that you get bits of that in a lot of his sketches and things that we saw in that live comedy, but then you really get the backstory. It's like you get a fuller painted picture. You're getting like the full color version now. Like we were watching it in black and white before, and now it's like full color, right?
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. And it's just like so bright and just, I mean, yes, like you said, so many people have fascinating stories. I mean, that's one of the reasons I started the podcast, was like just talking to people. Everybody's got a fascinating story to share, but he in particular has some really outrageous, really great stories. And again, like you said, comedic timing and everything.
Comedic timing, and then ends of each chapter, it makes you sit back and go, okay, it makes you think. You know, it makes you think about race relations in America, or gun control, just different things. And it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on. It gives you thoughts on where maybe his ideas come from with that history. But it was not only did it have that, but it was just very entertaining too. Very entertaining audiobook.
Yeah, that's definitely. I agree, and it's nice also to take a little break from the fiction and to kind of get the biographies or the nonfiction books, because sometimes especially since the pandemic, I just want an escape when I'm reading. I just want to be in another world. Like before, I used to read a lot of dystopian future type YA novels and things where there was a virus that's killing the world. And then like once the pandemic hit, I just didn't enjoy those as much, because I felt like, well, this is just reality. And it wasn't the escape that I sought after often when I am now, like as a listener of books or as a reader of books. Like I just want to be entertained kind of thing. But it is nice when you take a break from that. It's kind of like your veggies, you know, you're eating your veggies, but they're really good veggies. But then I like dessert for reading almost all the time. Like I just want dessert.
Right. Yeah. When it comes to listening to audiobooks, it depends, right? So the bad thing, there's a negative when you listen to a book like Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, or even A Gentleman in Moscow, is as soon as you finish a book like that, which is an experience, you want that experience again. And it's hard to capture it. So a well-written book, a high-quality book, right after an amazing book, like the taste on your palate is a little bit off. So my experience is like when a book is that good, I don't go searching for another book that's that good anymore. I'll cleanse the palate with.
You need a sorbet.
I'll sorbet it with some podcasts. And then I'll see if there's a audiobook that catches me and makes me want to dive deeper into
and
that.
Then you get like a little bit of distance from that feeling, because it's hard to recapture that feeling, and not every book is going to give you that.
And then I don't have to go in there with that expectation. I think that happened after a book like that, where Gentleman in Moscow came, we listened to it, all of us talked about it, and then we were searching for a book like that.
Yeah, historical fiction.
Just so we want that feeling again, and you couldn't get it. So over the past couple of years, for me, if there's a book that I listen to, I'm like, wow, that was really good. I'll segue into, let me catch up on some fitness podcasts that as much as I like them, they're not an experience. Had an experience while you listen to them. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know if listeners, because our now listeners, I mean, we're talking 6 years ago since I started doing this podcast, but everybody knows why I started, you know, after the election in 2016, how I was frustrated, wanted to, you know, have conversations, share voices, have a platform I could speak on. But it was just funny because up until that point, I never listened to any podcasts ever. And Oscar was always listening to podcasts, and I would actually make fun of you for always listening to podcasts.
Right. You make fun of me and you go, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast. I was like, okay. That's not how it went, but sort of.
Kind of. Not too far from that, but it's just kind of funny because I think you kind of have always been good for me in that way, where you introduced me to something that maybe I didn't read before. Not that I've never read before. Yeah, that's what it is. So I just didn't enjoy reading. Like I remember in high school, there are books I enjoyed. I always enjoyed The Sword in the Stone, which is why I was so excited to deep dive with Diane John. But like, I wouldn't be one to like pick up books and be reading in the way you were, when you've always been a reader from comic books. And I think that's what kind of gave you a love for it. And
crime fiction and comic books.
Yeah. And Kelly Sue DeConnick says it all the time, you know, comics are a medium, there's so much value in that also helping people be better readers. Yeah. I mean, you said your vocabulary is because of comics. Like it's more extensive because of comics, and like you would look stuff up.
Yeah, definitely more. I mean, when you come from, and you have this halfway, right? Because your mom has really good English, but your dad doesn't. But when you come from a home where there's no English spoken at home, and then you're learning things in school in English, and then come home, you have to a lot of times figure things out on your own. My dad was actually really good at math, so my math was always on point. Like he'd be like, "Here's long division, figure this out," right? But when it came to reading, history, English comprehension, we kind of had to figure that out on our own. And luckily, my mom would always take me to the library because she saw that I liked it, and she was like, "Oh, Oscar's bored. Let's just take him to the library." And she would just leave me there, and think I'll be back later, and I would just read, and then she'll come back and pick me up.
Were your other brothers with you?
Not that I can recall.
Yeah, no. You're the reader.
I just really like reading, but then I also...
She's like, one down, what am I going to do with the other three brothers?
But who out of my brothers has bad posture and bad vision? That is so there you go. So there's balance. Yeah.
Well, but you've corrected those things.
Yeah, LASIK surgery. That's true. With surgery, yes.
No, and also with the fitness, and you've had so many. We've done podcasts on posture and Kung Fu Pods. Like you've made an effort to actually correct that because of the fact that you knew like that happened. But I think it's hard to catch up on childhood reading. You can't go backwards with that, right? Like you can't go back and go, oh, I read these things as a child and now I've built upon that. So I feel like there's just a great loss when you didn't enjoy reading. And I actually was lucky when I was very young. My cousin Jackie would actually take me to the library as well. She's a big reader and, got me into the Narnia books and things like that. So there was points in my life where I read, but I have to say, definitely high school through, my college years. And I mean, it was like, that was because it was necessary.
Yeah.
Like I had to read because it was an assignment.
Right. I think children are going to probably go towards things that they enjoy. So I obviously enjoyed reading a lot and being stationary. And my brothers, like I'll take my younger brothers, they didn't. They were very active and physical. So probably there could have been a better balance, but that's, that goes into other conversations of like two working parents, are they able to give that supervision to the kids.
Is this a tangent, would you say?
Right, this is a tangent, right? So,
well, I do want to ask about that briefly because, English is a second language in many homes where, parents are immigrants and two working parents and having kids they have to support. And just like kind of that dynamic of, because I'm working in education, as you know, with my bill and trying to understand like the dynamic of what the needs of quote unquote kids are as they go forward, like what are the supplementary things. And so your mom would literally just drop you off at the library. But like in homes where you found that you had working parents and English was a second language and maybe you took to reading because that was just your nature. Right. But I guess where do we find the balance how would we have gotten your brothers to go with you to read at the library or something? Because they were always running around like crazy, right? Like, and there's no supervision because parents are working.
Yeah, ideal world, right? You have...
And we'll be clear for listeners, like poor parents, like people that were very underprivileged, living off food stamps, like having a very, very difficult time in hardship in terms of financially. Like you weren't like wealthy.
And also, which is important to say, is you don't feel that. Like I didn't think that when
Of course, but I want to reference so that people kind of have a gauge of like, this is not the Oscar who owns his own fitness business. And, we're working in what we're working now. Like your upbringing was definitively, was definitely a hardship and has shaped a lot of who you are and why you are the way you are. I know that you don't like to be like, woe is me, but there was, Oh
yeah, there's a hardship all around. But I think ideal world, you would have the parents would have the skill set to know how to engage with the children to do that. And so that's why education is so important. And for some people, it will be too late because that's just, you can't save everybody as much as we would want to. So all we can do is learn from things. And I think it's unfortunate, but how do more people get helped? It'll be through everyone, trying to do things together, but also luck, right? I consider it very lucky that I met you and that married you, and then because that kind of changed the trajectory of my life, right? A lot of that had to do with luck. Like if I had met someone else, my life would be in a totally different place. It could be because, you meet certain people. It could be someone that you marry, or it could be just friends that you hang out with. And those people either bring you up or bring you down. And so I think luck has a lot to do with that.
And you're lucky,
and
sir.
I'm a very lucky person, yes. And it doesn't get talked about enough, because all of us like to say, and I've done this also, it's like, well, when I was your age, I did this. But you think back, every newer generation is a little bit weaker than the generation before them, or maybe not weaker, but younger, right? Like they were getting married younger, then a little later, staying at home longer, all these things progressing. But
like the independence level. The independence level is definitively
right. So our independence
over time.
level is higher than the next generation, but our parents' independence level was higher than ours, and their parents was even higher, right? Like I can imagine my grandfather being like, yeah, you're working in the farm now here in the Dominican Republic, or whatever his job was, right? But to circle back to your question, the only thing I think can help is education, good intentions, and luck, right? To be successful in anything. So if someone has the education to do something, that's not enough. You also have the intent to help, and then there's a lot of luck that happens, because people can get battered down, right? Even if they've got the education and they've got the intent, you can still get battered down. So it's not just one thing. I don't have the answer, and you're trying to do your thing with passing the bill on education, and I think it will help many people, but a lot of people will still get left behind, because that's just the reality of
life. 100%. I mean, which is why it's like one small step in the right direction.
Correct.
Instead of going backwards. Like,
right. Or sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
Then another 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Especially in Florida.
Yeah, and it feels that way. But I don't know. I don't know if the word is cautiously optimistic, or you call it sometimes nihilism, but it's almost like I just think that we can control what we have, and we're going to continue to do that, and hopefully spread that around to other people as well.
Yeah, and I think it's, people are like, well, what will it matter? Because even if you get this bill passed, it's going to take years to implement, or, is it going to be implemented correctly? Is Florida going to block this and this? But it's kind of like, if I don't do this, then no one's doing it, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't do this, then there's no movement forward, or there's no effort and we just give up, then we're just giving up, right? So I think there has to be that fight. There has to be that push. Maybe not necessarily me all the time, but
I would agree.
It's a lot of work, but there's definitely value in it. I definitely obviously believe in it. Otherwise I wouldn't be putting in 40 plus hours a week on top of my normal life, right? To do this. Let's talk about comic books, because I pulled a few from my bookshelf, which of course none of them are new. But I thought the ones I pulled was because, one, we were just in Boston at our favorite comic book shop.
Paper Asylum. Comic Book Pete.
Yeah, shout out. And so, of course, we stock up there. We want to buy our books from our quote-unquote local comic book shop, which is in Beverly, Massachusetts.
Right. It's just one short plane ride away, and then a little drive.
Yeah, it's just, but
totally
we got mad love for that place. So we picked up some of our favorites, and then I know our listeners are going to be like, oh, here we go. But I always have to talk about my ultimate favorite, which finally just finished its huge arc that's going to take us on a big break from the Risen series. And of course, it's Lazarus.
Lazarus is a very, very dense. It's extremely entertaining.
Yeah.
But when you go back and because of the conversations you had with Greg, and listening to and knowing also what Michael Lark puts into the artwork, I'm sure that a lot of artists feel this way. They think about all the things that go through it. But Greg Rucka is and Matthew Lark and Michael Lark, and their book Lazarus really is like, I don't know, that was like an impetus for you for a lot of things.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, my gosh. And I've gone on and on and on about it. And our listeners know, like, Greg Rucka is my fave and everything. And I'm going to just complain a little bit because I only have, the first collection, because I was not smart enough when I was with both Greg and Michael to just buy all of them at one time so I could have them both signed. And now I don't want to get them until I can have them both signed. But, being that I know them so well, hopefully they'll magically appear on my doorstep one day. But this is like just one of those, I think, like when this is done, it's going to be in like bound and people are just going to really catch on. I mean, it's just taken a long time to complete, but if you look at other books, they're, you know, the other comics as well, it's the same thing with the journey. You know, artists have to go do other things and it takes kind of a while to come through, but I mean, there's just so much in this. I mean, and our pal Spencer Ackerman, who's a huge fan, and that brought us together as well. We could probably do a deep dive on that too, but just really grateful and absolutely love this book. And now it's at a really great point where I think readers can go through, digest it, and then be excited for like that next part of their journey. And it's at a kind of nice, not that there's closure, but there's definitely an end point to this arc. So really excited.
Lazarus
one of our faves.
Is amazing.
It's so amazing. And I love that Oscar brought me to comic books, and I wanted to pull this one because this is where we bought in Paper Asylum, because we also watched the show this summer.
So this Paper Girls is also amazing, and Brian K. Vaughan is, I mean, the guy is just like he only hits
prolific.
Home runs.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. He only hits home runs, and the only thing that's bittersweet about this is that the book was so good, the series was really good, season 1.
A lot of fun, yeah.
And I heard it, and then it's canceled.
I know.
And it's just crap. And the same thing as Why the Last Man, which was amazing.
Another BK
And the
Vaughn.
season was also good, in my opinion, which, you know, and that was canceled also. So,
it's so
you know
hard.
what?
It's hard to get good content.
You know what it is you can't be winning all the time. So like, he's a winner with Why the Last Man, a winner with Paper Girls, a winner with Saga, all of this acclaim. You know, it just probably just, it's karmic justice that his TV shows get canceled, because then it's I don't think Brian would agree with this. Because then it's just, yeah. I mean, what is this guy just going to win all the freaking time? You know.
You know what's funny is he doesn't feel that way. He's always looking at like his nemesis Ed Brubaker, and he's like, that guy.
Ed Brubaker is also one of my favorite because he does comics and crime fiction, which are
it's like a marriage of your two favorite things.
And no one does it better than Ed Brubaker.
Yeah. So it's just, and I have to say, like this whole journey, at some point, you know, I still cover a lot of the social justice issues that I want to talk about. I find people that are super interesting, but I have been just so blessed to speak to all the best, literally, comic creators and writers and some artists. I don't have enough artists on the show. I think I need to find more of them. But like, wow, it's kind of crazy. Like all of our favorites, like I've had them on this show. And Brian K. Vaughan was a huge get though. Like I stalked the guy for 5 years. But he finally came around. So, and he was absolutely a delight. And it, you know, it's also because of my relationship with Greg Rucka and our friendship. And I think the cool thing about the comics world is that you have a range, because comics is a medium, not just a genre or whatever, right? Like it's like you could read Usagi Yojimbo and have that for like younger kids or older kids. Like anybody can read it and enjoy it. But then you've got like your, you know, mature reading type of stuff, which of course you gravitate to. But as a child, you read the typical superhero stuff, right?
So as a child, when it came to comic books, I would read things that, when I look back, it still brought me joy, like the comic books, like a lot of the X-Men stuff. Maybe the stories quality don't hold up to my standard as Oscar in his 40s. Like I'll look back and go, oh, this is a little bit cheesy. But Oscar at 13, 14, 15 was like, this was amazing.
Yeah.
That's how I think of comic books. And then as I got older, the comic books, it's like I aged with the authors, with the creators. And so we really are living in this kind of golden age of. We really are. It's an art form that's so cool, because something like Lazarus is not a movie that's done and given, or a book that's done. You're actually going with a journey. And sometimes that can be a little frustrating, because you're like, I want to know what happens. But then also it can be pretty exciting that you're going on the journey with the author, maybe a couple steps behind. Yeah. With the creators. They're creating it, releasing it, then you get a taste of it. And then they know what's going to happen, but knowing what's going to happen and having that canvas, it's not filled in yet. So there's still. And I finally am getting that journey, because before I used to only like to binge. Correct. Because of my impatience, and you know. It's still like binging comic books. There's still a lot of value and joy in getting like, oh, here's the omnibus of Sandman, and you could read it all at once, right? But
But I love that. I love that how you just put that, like we're on a journey with the creators, because it really does make that experience a lot more unique to kind of go, well, we lived through this with that. Like,
well, you literally are living it through with Greg, because you had him how many times on your podcast?
Almost 60 now.
Right,
we're in our upper 50s. We're getting quite the numbers. So I did want to talk about some of the ones that we did read recently that I really enjoyed that you brought to my attention, which was the Layla Starr one.
As a comic book? Yeah, that one was really cool.
What's the actual title? I should have made sure we had that ready.
I believe it's called The Many Deaths of Layla Starr.
Yes.
And what was really cool about that is that we got insight into Indian culture, which I'll be honest, I don't know much about.
Yeah.
And I love anything that has to do with the religion or mythologies of different cultures. So I don't know a lot about that. But this one had a little bit of a taste of that with reincarnation, and it was just beautifully done. Great artwork, great writing.
Yeah, and that's Ram V and Philippe Andre.
Right.
So,
and I think that one I kind of devoured it very quickly.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of times with comic books, this is another thing that's different too with comic books than reading an actual book or listening to an audiobook. Is with that art form, you're reading words, you're seeing pictures, and a lot of times there's always a value in the reread of those, because you will always miss something.
And that's a nice bite-sized one. It's not like 50 books.
I think
it's like 5 issues. Yeah, it's super. That one really jumps out at me. It's like one that we quote unquote.
Let's take a look. Let's take a look at the history.
Like kind of recently read, right? Obviously, there's just like 1,000,001 good things, and I've definitely had all the creators that are amazing on here, kind of talking about their recent works. But like in terms of like this is one that's not like ongoing, and it was super enjoyable. But yeah, any others that come to mind for you that you,
as far as comic books
I know you read a lot of Ed Brubaker last year.
Yeah, I think I read
and we enjoyed the Something is Killing the Children.
Something is very good. It's really a little bit of horror, but it's
James Tinian and Werther Dell. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna butcher the name. Apologies.
Yeah. Something's Killing Children is what I would call palatable horror. So like
Stranger Things.
Stranger Things.
Yeah.
So it's got some scary stuff, but it's done in a way that I think if someone is opposed to it, they would still enjoy it. Ed Brubaker, if you'd like crime fiction, like I said, I mean the man does crime fiction as good as any hard-boiled detective novel, but in the genre of comic books.
And that's typically your like, if you're going to read fiction, those are your preferred novels.
Yeah. And
I realize I like historical fiction after like kind of seeing like my history of Goodreads, and I do my like ratings and everything. I realize that's what I really gravitate towards. So, that's kind of more my speed.
So lately I haven't been reading a lot of comic books, but if I can give you, well, there's a ton. We don't have time to go through it all, but one of the best books that I read last year that's a history book is Powers and Thrones, which I told you, I was like, you'll never read this book because it's like 24 hours. Dan Jones, this history, but it takes place from the fall of the Roman Empire to the beginning of the Age of Exploration. So you see the Roman Empire, like, okay, this is what happens as it falls. And then from those ashes comes like this civilization that pretty much dominated the entire world, right, when the Age of Exploration happens. But he does it in a way that's similar to Dan Carlin, which to me, I look at it as like really entertaining fiction.
Which is hardcore history podcast.
Right, which is well-researched, accurate history, but done in a way that is very captivating. And so that one is a really good one. And then most recently are 2 books by, I don't know how to pronounce his last name exactly, but Jonathan Haidt, and it's The Righteous Mind and The Coddling of America. And the reason I like those 2 books is because, when it comes to things like Kung Fu, right, or Tai Chi, we see the yin yang sign. And we always talk about how it's not black or white, there's gray. Like that's where everything is. You need a little bit of both. And he does a really good job of, at least in my mind, when I read it, of being able to look at things and say, well, here's, if you could look at it from political sides, from religious sides, of like, there isn't a black or white, and very specifically, like, if we were to say someone that we don't agree with is completely wrong or evil, then that is why we have a lot of the issues that we have now. So except for one person who I won't name, right? Except for one person that I won't name, I don't think anyone is completely, totally evil.
Well, as our dear friend, Coach Dan John always says, it's like, I'm a really good person who's done bad things, and I'm a bad person who's done really good things. And I think that was maybe his dad or someone he knows. He also credits that. But like, it just, that really resonates with me, because we like to be righteous all the time and think that we're always in the right or trying to do the right thing. And while we may be trying to do the right thing, it doesn't mean in that process we do the wrong thing, right? And I think it's just that reflection of it and making sure we're not narcissists, right? And that the world doesn't revolve around us. But thank you for letting me be a better reader, introducing me to comic books for my insomnia. That's how it started, actually. So listeners may not have gone back to episode 52 or whatever.
Do you remember the name of the comic book that you read?
Yes, Kingdom Come.
Okay. It was painted by Alex Ross. So it was
so I thought all comic books were supposed to look like this, and it was just supposed to all be painted. And when I started to kind of go on that journey of the next ones, I'm like, how come it doesn't all look like this? It's so elaborate. So
your first foray into comics is Kingdom Come, which is just
because I like Wonder Woman,
the best painter ever. And one of the best writers, Mark Waid, putting this story together.
I need to shout out to Wonder Woman Historia now that we're talking about recent reads and talking about just mind-blowing art, and starting with Phil Jimenez and of course Kelly Sue DeConnick, and then the other issues have come out. Gene Ha, Nicola Scott, and oh my gosh, my brain is not working. But Wonder Woman Historia takes us on just. It's not Wonder Woman what you think, right? It's not what you think of when you think of Wonder Woman.
It's not what you think of when you think of comic books either.
No,
like what they did, the one that I read it's basically, this is art and we're just putting it out there, and it's done in a way that it's hard to explain. Like, you have to actually have it in your hands and see it.
Oh yeah, it's so overwhelming, to be honest. So when you started to talk about Kingdom Come and the painting and how beautiful it was, and of course I had both the amazing Kelly Sue DeConnick and Phil Jimenez on the show, and he, she told me that he would give her like outfit choices and shoe choices for the different. I mean, the lengths of which he was able to take that. Artistry and not be on a specific deadline of like, okay, you have to do it now. Because I think that's where a lot of artists run into stress and pressure, when there's just deadlines and they don't get to really have as an expression. Whereas this is just like masterful. Like, it's just so amazing.
I don't know if
and the other ones have looked phenomenal.
For that one, I don't know if I remember correctly, but it seemed like it wasn't very dense reading, which means to me that it was so well thought out, right? Because like, there's a quote, it may be Mark Twain or one of these, and you never know who really wrote it, but it's something like where he said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time for it. Because to be super concise with what you're saying or with what you're trying to put out, I think is harder. And while Phil Jimenez made this like explosion of art, I don't remember the words being super, like, it wasn't very wordy.
Superfluous,
yeah. And it just seemed like
everything was intentional.
It was so impactful.
Yeah, she really.
So I have to read it again because that's another.
As soon as I finish, I'm like, must read this now and interpret for me there's so much going on. Yeah. So that's another one. I mean, there's so many. We could do a whole comics episode, and maybe we'll invite Comic Book Pete on.
I think he's got great insight.
Yes, he's got great insight and enthusiasm. But I think I love having these conversations because it does spark interest. And to be full disclosure, listeners, we did not actually sit down right before this and start to like go, okay, here's the ones we're going to talk about. We just kind of
here's what we did. We have on our phones a history of the books that we borrowed from the library, and we just scrolled through.
I did pull a couple from my bookshelf.
And there was a time where I had. Maybe it was a quarantine time where I started writing down notes on certain books. I don't do that all the time. I do like to sometimes, if something is really, while you're listening to it, go, wow, this really was impactful. I do like to write it down only because it helps me remember it, even if I don't look back at those notes. Like actually writing it down or typing it, and then And then in a very amateur way, I'll go to Mimi and say, hey, I read this book and it had this thought. And I start verbalizing it. And it's not a way for me to teach on it, but a way for me, when I say it out loud, I was like, wow, I really don't have a handle on this content. So when I was talking about those 2 books by Jonathan Haidt, I want to reread them because I don't really feel like I talk about them. I just know that, wow, this means something, and I want to go back into it. So,
yeah, I guess I need to be a better note taker because I definitely have trouble articulating, except for, oh my gosh, I love this so much. So I would love to hear thoughts from our listeners if they've read any of the books that we talked about today, if they have suggestions for us, because I'm always looking for content and things to digest and read. But just shout out to all the people that we did mention, and gratitude for them creating and being just disciplined enough and inspired enough and creative enough to just be able to share something that has inspired us to even want to talk about it. But
at the same time, you're really spoiling us, because what happens then is you read something that's not at that quality, and you're like, oh, I just want to go back and read, some ruck. I need some ruck in my life.
I just also go back and want to get what I'm comfortable with. I want to rewatch, reread.
And so there is a problem with being too good.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
And these people some of them are just too good. Yeah.
All right. Well, Oscar, as always, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and having a chat with me.
It's my pleasure. And I look forward to dinner later today.
All right. Later, everybody.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.